We started up a little earlier this year due to the way the calendar falls. I know some guys are still traveling for family and off because school hasn't started or won't start till next week, but I don't like to take 2 weekends off or 2 Fridays off from team because it's hard to get started back up again. So we're missing some guys, but we're going to start today anyway to get all our sessions in before we need to end in March. So welcome again to team. It's good to get started up. How many of you, speaking of New Year, how many of you watched some of the New Year's Eve specials? You know, the ball drop and all that. Anybody watch that? Sometimes I like to watch TV, and we were going back and forth between the copycat shows, you know, they're all kind of the same, and sometimes I like to watch TV with this thought in mind. What if you lived in a different part of the world? You know, I've traveled some this summer. What if you lived in, you know, Nigeria or Rwanda or something, and the only thing you saw about American culture was the New Year's Eve show? And so what determinations did you make about America by just watching, if all you watched was the New Year's Eve show? I mean, what in the world would you think? No, I always think, no wonder most of the world hates America, because that's what they think we're about. But my wife had to wake me up. She was shaking me at, the ball's dropping, you're going to miss it. They're already at like 8, going down to 0. And I realized I told her I'm going to fall asleep, so I kind of did. So Happy New Year. By the way, great to have Dan Isham back with us. Dan's right down here in front of this table. Dan, as you know, had a stroke event before Christmas. We prayed for him, and I happened to see him on one of our Christmas Eve services at South Street campus, took the picture, put it in the email, and he's back with us today. He's still got some recovery to go, so we'll keep praying for Dan, but so great to have him here, and to see sometimes we see God's work in someone's life right in front of our eyes, and that's fun to do. So welcome back, Dan. Okay, here's our story for today. A long-distance truck driver. Oh, wait, back up. I got one more announcement to make. I forgot. Couples events coming up. It's on your table. We have these little flyers. This is an event we do every 2 years. My wife and I do it. This year, our son and daughter-in-law are doing it with us. We do it right here in this room. It's Friday night, January 24th. It's a great event to bring your wife to, bring some friends to. It's fun. It'll be encouraging. You'll get a laugh or two. But the biggest thing is your wife will love that you wanted to come with her to this thing. And what marriage is really all about, I say it here, but I won't say it there that night, is you got to get some chips in the bank, man. You get chips in the bank, and you're going to have to use those at one time or another. So bring your wife out to this. You'll have a good time. I promise you'll have a good time. All right, now the story for the day. A long-distance truck driver stops at a restaurant to get some food and rest. A motorcycle gang soon arrives at the same restaurant. The bikers immediately start making a scene. They're loud, they're profane, and they're rude. The trucker politely asks them to tone it down a bit because there are families trying to enjoy dinner. And the bikers don't like that at all and start abusing the trucker. They knock his hat off, call him names, throw his food on the floor, and challenge him to fight. He doesn't fight. In fact, he doesn't do anything. He just tries to finish his food, pays his bill, and leaves. After he leaves, one of the bikers says, "Well, he isn't much of a man, is he?" The waitress says, "Well, he isn't much of a truck driver either. He just ran over 20 motorcycles on his way out." All right, our clip today, setting up what we're going to talk about, is from a movie that is consistently called one of the top 100 of movies ever made, particularly in the last 20 or 30 years, called Shawshank Redemption. This is a conversation between Andy and Red. Red is played by Morgan Freeman. Andy's played by Tim Robbins. They've been inmates in Shawshank prison. Red for a crime he committed as a young man, and Andy for a crime he did not commit, but they're both serving long sentences, and they have this conversation about what life will be like if and when they ever get out. So take a look.
You think you'll ever get out of here? Me? Yeah. One day, when I got a long white beard and 2 or 3 marbles rolling around upstairs, they let me out. I'll tell you where I'd go. Zihuatanejo. What? Zihuatanejo. It's in Mexico. A little place on the Pacific Ocean. You know what the Mexicans say about the Pacific? No. They say it has no memory. That's where I want to live the rest of my life. A warm place with no memory. Open up a little hotel right on the beach by buy some worthless old boat and fix it up new. Take my guests out, charter fishing.
Say what, Nail?
In a place like that, I could use a man that knows how to get things.
I don't think I can make it on the outside, Andy. I've been in here most of my life. I'm an institutional man now. It's like Brooks was.
Wow, you underestimate yourself.
I don't think so. In here, I'm the guy who can get things for you, sure, but outside, all you need is the yellow pages. Hell, I wouldn't even know where to begin. Pacific Ocean? Yeah. That scared me to death, something that big.
Not me. I didn't shoot my wife and I didn't shoot her lover. Whatever mistakes I made, I paid for them and then some. That hotel, that boat, I don't think that's too much to ask.
I don't think you ought to be doing this to yourself, Andy. It's just the pipe dreams. I mean, Mexico is way the hell down there, and you're in here, and that's the way it is.
Yeah, right. That's the way it is. It's down there and I'm in here. I guess it comes down to a simple choice, really. Get busy living, or get busy dying.
Yeah, that whole clip gets to that one line, get busy living or get busy dying. Andy's saying, and he's right, there are really two paths in life. There's a path to living and there's a path to dying, and you kind of have to choose. We're in session 14 today, out of what will be 25. Today's session is called GPS for the Soul. There's a reason I chose that little title. But we're coming to the end of the Sermon on the Mount. We've been in the Sermon on the Mount all the way since we began team this year. Jesus has been teaching in this famous section of his teachings about what it means to live in the kingdom of God. What does it mean to be salty? What does it mean to be a person of spiritual influence? What does it mean to be a representative of the kingdom that Jesus rules over? And now he talks about the choice we have between living and dying. Now, I want to say before I even jump into this that this is probably, if not the most difficult and controversial, certainly among the most difficult and controversial teachings that we find in the Sermon on the Mount and even in the entire New Testament. Jesus has taught things like generosity and mercy and love and prayer. And last time we were together, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And in general, people hear those things in our culture and they go, yeah, good, those are good things. Yeah, those are good things. I believe in those things. But this, what he says today, sounds strange in our culture, even offensive. But he said these things. And so we're going to take it on. Matthew chapter 7. Beginning in verse 13, Jesus is speaking. He says, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit you will recognize them. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Okay, what Jesus is saying here, the first thing, and we could take many, many sessions on this, but the first thing he's saying today is that every road has a destination. Every road has a destination. Way back in the days before cell phones, before every device we had GPS built into it, my wife and I were making a trip. Her family at that time lived in western, sort of central North Dakota, near Bismarck. And so it was one of our first trips up that way. It's an 800-mile trip. And so I planned out the trip using an atlas. Remember those? Kind of mapped it out, wrote down where we were going to turn, all that, maybe threw it in the car and took it with us. And so we were some 600 miles into an 800-mile trip. Maybe we went through the night. I can't quite remember. But had to make a gas stop near Fargo. Got out, got the gas, used the restroom, got some snacks, got back in the car, got back on the highway. After an hour or so, I started seeing signs for Minneapolis. And, if you're thinking where we were, that's not good. And it hit me as sort of strange. Why are we seeing signs for Minneapolis? And then I realized, it hit me, that when I had come out of the gas station, off the exit, and got back on the highway, I got back going east instead of west on 94. And the point there is, I thought I was going in the right direction. I believed I was going in the right direction. But despite my sincerity, despite my belief, I was headed in exactly the opposite direction. Jesus says, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Now, it's common to hear people say something like this. Well, all roads lead to God. All roads lead to God, meaning that all spiritual paths, all spiritual belief systems, eventually, if they're sincere, get to the same place, God. And that sounds good, it really does. It's very spiritually correct to say that. But Jesus is actually here teaching the exact opposite of that. He says, there is a narrow gate that leads to life, and there's a broad gate that leads to destruction. Now, what does he mean here? First, let me start with what he does not mean. Jesus does not mean that salvation, that is relationship with God, eternal life, is limited to only a few. We know from the rest of his teachings and the rest of the New Testament that salvation is open to all, and it's free. It's open to all. So he's not saying that. What he is saying is that spiritual truth, like all truth, is exclusive. Now, I'm going to talk more about that in just a minute. He's saying that all roads have a destination, but also that all roads do not lead to the same destination. Now, we all know this is true in the physical world in our everyday lives. Let's say you ask me this morning, hey, how do I get to Elburn? I would say, what I would not say is, just leave the parking lot, pick any which way you want to go, and just drive. You're eventually going to get there. I would not say that. I would say, leave the parking lot, turn right, and drive west about 6 miles, and you're going to get to Elburn. Jesus is saying that spiritual truth works the same way. In John chapter 14, I did not print a couple of these verses in your manual, so you write this down. John 14:6. Jesus says this, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. I'm going to say that again so you can hear it, because you can look it up later on your own. He says, I am the way, not a way, I am the way, the truth, not a truth, but the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. And there it is. This one sentence might be the most important in the entire Bible, because if it's true, the eternal destiny of every living human being, every human soul that's ever existed, depends on this truth, if it's true. If it's not true, then Jesus was one of the greatest frauds and liars who ever lived, and we're just wasting our time. But people don't like to deal with this sentence because it's so striking and controversial. It's so spiritually incorrect, but it's what Jesus said about himself. That's the narrow way. That's what he means by the narrow way. What Jesus means is that spiritual truth is like a road that leads to Elburn. It's exclusive. And that means, secondly, that not every... Come on. Where do I point, Eric? Oops, up, went back. There we go. Every truth is not true. This sounds like a weird statement, but every truth is not true. I saw a Facebook post, maybe a week or so ago, over the holidays. It was posted by a high school classmate of mine. Now, I didn't know this person when we were in school, really, but somehow, the way Facebook works, it linked up together as a bunch of people who went to my high school who haven't seen in 40-some years who are in this group. And so I just noticed she posted something. And she posted a post acknowledging the death of a one-time spiritual guru who called himself Ram Dass. Has anybody heard that name? Anybody recognize that name? Because I didn't recognize it either. So I'd never heard of him, but he seemed important to this person from my high school, so I looked him up. His real name was Richard Alpert. He was a professor at Harvard University in the 60s, and he was a colleague of Timothy Leary in the psychology department. The two of them in the early 60s began experimenting with drugs, marijuana, LSD, psychedelic mushrooms, and they stopped teaching their classes in grad school, and eventually were both fired from Harvard for giving drugs to the students they were supposed to be teaching. Alpert then spent several years pursuing intellectual enlightenment and spiritual freedom through LSD and other drugs, eventually going to India for like 10 years, where he shaped his own spiritual philosophy based on Buddhism, Hinduism, and Sufi teachings. He eventually wrote a book, came back to this country, wrote a book called Be Here Now, which sold over 2 million copies. In one of his last interviews before he died, he was asked about the use of hallucinogenics as a spiritual path. This was what he said. Quote, LSD shows that spiritual ecstasy, religious revelation, and union with God were now directly accessible to everyone. It's a fabulous path. Everyone should try it. Now, that made me wonder, how many people's lives were changed for the better by using LSD or hallucinogenic mushrooms? Now, how many people can we find who would say, my life was really going nowhere until I started doing LSD. And then I really just got it all together. Or how many people would say, I became a better person, a better husband, better father, and I would owe it all to Ram Dass and hallucinogenic mushrooms. Jesus said in verse 15, watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus, by their fruit you will recognize them. What he's saying here is that not everything called truth is actually true. Now, we live in a culture today that is fascinated by truth. Everyone is all about truth. We hear all the time about fake news and real news, and news outlets claim to have true news, and we have people called truthers who believe stuff like the earth is flat or like 9/11 was created by the government. We're all fascinated by truth. But truth now is a personal, individual thing, meaning our culture now seems to teach and assume that truth is whatever you think it is to you. That's our new definition of truth, as in speak your truth, live your truth. And it's amazing, if you pay attention, sorry, I got something in my throat. It's amazing how often we hear really, really smart people say this kind of thing. It's all over the place. I'm amazed that as a culture, we've sort of swallowed this hook, line, and sinker. We've accepted this as gospel. But the idea that I can create my own truth is a really recent phenomenon in human civilization. It's very, very recent, and it's very first world. And it's, I'm going to say it this way, but it's really dumb, and it's dangerous. Here's why. Let's think about gravity, for example. Just gravity. Let's say I told you today, right after team, I'm going to climb up to the top of the steeple tower, right out here, and I'm going to jump off. You'd say, tell me that again. What are you going to do? Do you have some plan? What are you going to land on? Whatever. No, I'm just going to jump off. Because gravity doesn't apply to me. Because my truth is I can fly. My truth is I can just float down because that's my truth. Now, you would think that's ridiculous. You'd be concerned about me. You'd probably try to drive me to the hospital because something's wrong, right? Of course, we don't argue with truth when it has to do with the laws of physics or laws of nature or with mathematics. I don't go to the bank and say, you can send me the statement, and it says I have $200 in the bank. Well, my truth is $200,000. Could you please change that, please? Of course, we don't do that. We understand. We don't create truth. We discover it, and we then arrange our lives accordingly around that truth. But when it comes to spiritual truth, we tend to reserve the right to create our own, to make our own recipe, what works for me. As I said before, a common belief today is that all roads lead to God. Another way to say this is that all religions and attempts at spirituality are essentially the same. This is literally nonsense. Okay, here's why. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, just to take the three great monotheistic religions in the world, they all claim there's one God. And yet, Christianity teaches that that one God has revealed himself in three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Judaism and Islam do not teach that. Not even close. Okay? Hinduism is not monotheistic. Hinduism is polytheistic. It teaches there are 300 million different gods and goddesses. Hinduism teaches the doctrine of karma, teaches the doctrine of reincarnation, and we can go on and on. So the point is they do not teach the same truth. They don't. And the law of non-contradiction says two contradictory propositions cannot both be true in the same way at the same time. Therefore, it's nonsense, literally, to say all religions are the same. For example, if I say Mitch Trubisky is a great quarterback, and you say Mitch Trubisky is a terrible quarterback, both can't be true at the same time in the same way. Although I think the Bears ownership thinks they are true in the same way, but that's a separate point. The great religions of the world are dramatically different and therefore cannot all be true in the same way. All truth, by definition, is exclusive. Now, how do we know what is true and not true? How can we discern? There are two ways. I don't have time to get into all this, but there are two ways. First, there is consider the source of that truth. Where does the so-called truth come from? Does it come from inside of me? Is it my thought, my preference, my ideas? Does it come from the inside of some other human being? His thoughts, his dreams, his ideas? Or does it come from outside of me, from outside human experience? Again, I don't have time to deal with this today, but basically, all world religions except Christianity come from the ideas and thoughts of one person. You know, Islam comes from the mind of Muhammad, dreams and visions. It's not anchored in history. Same with Buddhism, same with other great world religions. Christianity, of all the world religions, comes to us in a different way. It doesn't come from the mind of one person. It comes through revelation from God in history, in real time, space, and places, over a long period of time. It's the story of the Bible. It's different. Now, you can reserve judgment, and you can do the research yourself. This is the discipline called apologetics. I can recommend books if you have questions and you doubt that, and you think, well, how can you really say that? There are places you can go to learn and read and be challenged. For example, let me just mention two books to you that I've read in recent couple of years that are really, really challenging and really, really good, written by Tim Keller, Keller. One is called The Reason for God. The other is called Making Sense of God. They're both challenging. They cover a wide scope of philosophies, history, science, all that stuff, and they help you understand the source of truth and how we can say with confidence where truth comes from and where it doesn't come from. Secondly, we consider the fruit. What does the so-called truth produce? Jesus said, by their fruit, you will recognize them. So, to use that analogy, going back to the spiritual guru in the 60s, Ram Dass, Richard Alpert, spiritual enlightenment through LSD and hallucinogenic mushrooms, what did that teaching produce? You can go back and find out. Consider the source and consider the fruit. Thirdly, today, Jesus is talking about vain faith. We come to the really, really hard part of this text. Verse 21, he says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will say to them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Now, what does he mean by this? Does he mean that if I go to church and if I call him Lord, but on Tuesday or Wednesday struggle with my temper or struggle with lustful thoughts, that he's going to on that day say, he never knew me? Is that what he's saying? Is Jesus teaching absolute religious obedience or perfection is what's required? No, that's not what he's teaching. Remember, throughout the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus has been confronting religious hypocrisy. One of the main things Jesus goes about doing, and when you read the stories of the Gospels, is he points a finger at the religious folks who were hypocritical in their practice more often than anything else. He's been saying that genuine faith is not about religious behavior. It's not about religious rituals. It's not about being seen praying in public or making your sacrifices. He's saying that genuine faith is a relationship with God, a relationship. So the issue is not doing more religious things. The issue is knowing God through Jesus. So he's not talking about religious behavior, he's talking about the gospel. Another verse you should write down and look up on your own, John chapter 6, verse 40. John 6:40. Listen to what Jesus says. He says, for my Father's will, he just said, the one who does the will of my Father, not the one who just calls me Lord. Okay, what's the Father's will? He says, for my Father's will is that everyone who looks to the Son and believes in him shall have eternal life, and I will raise them up at the last day. He's saying that the will of the Father is to provide one way to eternal life. The will of the Father is to provide one way to deal with sin. The will of the Father is to provide one way to be born again, one way to be certain of your eternal destination. And Jesus said, that one way is me. That's what he said. That one way is me. I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No one finds their way to the Father but through me. So how? How? Apostle Paul says in Romans chapter 10, you could write this one down too, Romans 10, verses 9 and 10. If you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. How do we get on the right road? How do we get on the road that leads to that destination? Paul spells it out clearly. You confess with your mouth and you believe in your heart, and you'll be saved. Back to the question, how to get to Elburn. If you ask me how to get to Elburn, and I said to you, you know, I love you, and I really hate to be, I don't want to be limiting to you and your freedom and your choices, so just leave the parking lot and start driving. You just drive any which way you want to go, and I promise you, eventually you're going to get to Elburn. Now, would that be a loving thing for me to say to you? Would that be a merciful thing for me to say to you? Would that be a kind thing for me to say to you? It would sound good, it just wouldn't be true. It would sound good, it just wouldn't be loving. But however, if you ask me that same question, I say, you know, here's what you do. You go out the parking lot, you turn right, and you head straight west, and you go about 6 miles, and you're going to get to downtown Elburn. Now, that's pretty exclusive. There's really only one way you can turn out there, to go west. It's exclusive. You say, but I really want to go there. Well, no, but you asked me, you want to go there. That's how you get there. Would that be loving? Would that be exclusive? Would that be hard-hearted, mean-spirited? No, that would be very loving, it would be very kind. That's what Jesus is saying. Every road has a destination. Every spiritual road has a destination. There's truth, and there's that which is not true. Jesus says, I am truth. We can do all the research, we can do all the work, we can do all the thinking, but he said that. If he didn't say it, we wouldn't have to deal with it, but he said it. And that's the truth. Here's the questions I want you to deal with around the table today. I'm going to change these just a little bit. The first question is, have you ever, or do you now struggle with the Christian teaching that Jesus is the only way to God? And I want you to know it's perfectly fine to say, yeah, I struggle with that. That's hard for me. It's hard for me right now. I don't know if I buy it. That's the question. Do you ever, or have you struggled now with the teaching that Jesus is the only way to God? Secondly, Jesus says that not everyone who calls him Lord actually knows him or lives in a relationship with him. So the question I have here is, how certain are you of your standing with Christ? Now, the word certain there is a tough word because we all have questions. I don't mean you have no questions. What I really mean there is, how clear are you in your understanding of what I've been talking about today? What questions do you still have about this issue, about Jesus, about faith, about salvation? And if you have those questions, just share them around the table. Leaders, jot them down, because I would like to have them sent to me. I would like to hear the questions that come up at the table. How clear are you about the road and the destination? And just talk about that for a little bit, and I'll wrap you up when we get before 7 o'clock, and I'll have a prayer time for us then too. So get some donuts, and I'll wrap you up at the right time.